The sound of Richard Sterling laughing echoed off the cold glass walls of the executive boardroom. It was not a warm laugh. It was a sharp, mocking sound that cut right through the quiet hum of the air conditioning. I sat at the far end of the long mahogany table. My hands were resting flat on the wood. I did not move. I just watched him. My name is Marcus Vance. For the last 6 years, I have been the director of enterprise architecture and the lead systems integrator for this company. I built our core software from the ground up. I wrote the first lines of code. I stayed late to fix the bugs. I made sure the system could handle millions of transactions without breaking. I gave this company 6 years of my life. And today, I simply asked for a 10% raise. Richard stopped laughing and looked at me. He leaned back in his leather chair and steepled his fingers. He was the new CEO, brought in by the board to modernize the company. He wore a very expensive suit, but he knew absolutely nothing about how our technology actually worked. Marcus, Richard said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. You are asking for a significant bump in pay. But let's be honest about your role here. You're basically a glorified IT help desk. You keep the servers running. That is it. He looked around the table at the other board members. They all stared back at their notebooks. No one looked at me. No one defended me. Your role is obsolete, Richard continued, smiling now. We are moving to a fully automated cloud structure next quarter. Artificial intelligence will handle the system maintenance. We do not need a senior engineer for this anymore. In fact, I am surprised you even think you are needed. The room was completely silent. The disrespect was heavy in the air. He was not just denying my raise. He was erasing 6 years of my hard work in front of the entire executive team. He was telling me I was worthless. I looked at Richard. I felt a hot flash of anger in my chest, but I pushed it down. I did not yell. I did not get emotional. I did not beg. I am an architect. I build things. I did not break them. And right now, I needed to be perfectly calm. I slowly closed my black notebook. I placed my pen on top of it. Then I stood up. Understand, I said. My voice was steady and quiet. I accept your decision. I will clear my desk by 5 o'clock. Richard smiled. It was a smug, victorious smile. He thought he just won a power game. He thought he just saved the company a lot of money by bullying a quiet engineer into quitting. He had no idea what he had just done. I turned and walked out of the boardroom. The heavy glass door clicked shut behind me. As I walked down the long hallway toward my office, a cold sense of calm washed over me. The anger was gone. It was replaced by pure, clear focus. Richard thinks the software runs itself. He thinks it is just a bunch of automated scripts in the cloud. He does not know the truth. He does not know that I am the only person who holds the master encryption keys for the entire client database. He does not know that the core architecture is tied directly to my personal security credentials. He just fired the only man keeping the company alive, and he did it to save a few $1,000s. I walked into my office and shut the door. I pulled a small cardboard box from the closet. I started packing my personal items. I packed my coffee mug. I packed the framed photo of my dog. I packed my personal external hard drives. With every item I placed in the box, I felt the trap snapping shut. Richard thought he was the smartest guy in the room. He thought he held all the power. But as I taped the box closed, I knew the truth. He had just made the biggest mistake of his entire career. I was going to destroy his business, and I was going to do it legally. I looked at the empty desk. It was clean, just a bare wooden surface. It was a perfect metaphor for what Richard was going to face. He wanted to strip away the legacy costs. He wanted to remove the expensive senior engineers. He was going to get exactly what he asked for. I picked up the box and walked out of the office for the last time. The countdown had begun. I walked down to the Human Resources Department on the second floor. The HR manager, a quiet woman named Sarah, looked uncomfortable. She would not meet my eyes. I handed her my company badge and my key card. She printed out a stack of exit papers for me to sign. I signed every single page without reading them. There was no need. I already knew exactly what was in them. As I walked back through the main lobby, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a push notification for a company-wide email. I opened it. The sender was Richard Sterling. The subject line read, "Streamlining our future." I read the first paragraph. Richard was already taking credit. He was telling the entire company that he had successfully streamlined our operations and removed unnecessary legacy costs. He was bragging about modernizing the tech department. He was painting himself as a visionary leader who was not afraid to make the tough calls. He was rewriting history in real time, and he was using my exit as his victory lap. I put my phone away and walked out to my car. I got in, started the engine, and drove home. The emotional fallout hit me hard during the drive. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I spent 6 years of my life building this place. I missed my brother's wedding because I had to stay in the server room and fix a catastrophic database crash. I gave up almost every weekend for 2 years just to integrate our biggest client into our system. I bled for this company, and they threw me away like garbage just to save a few $1,000s on a payroll budget. I felt a deep, heavy sadness. But as I pulled into my driveway and walked into my home office, the sadness started to fade. It hardened into something else. It turned into pure, cold focus. I sat down at my desk and opened my personal laptop. I bypassed the company network and logged into my private monitoring dashboard. I looked at the actual, real-time state of the company's technology. Richard truly believes our system is a modern, fully automated machine. He thinks it runs on sleek, modern cloud servers. The truth is, it is held together by digital duct tape. The core middleware I built to connect the client database to the mainframe is still running on a legacy physical server in the basement. It is an old, fragile machine, and it requires a very specific manual memory patch every 48 hours to keep it from crashing. I do that patch every Tuesday and Friday morning before anyone else arrives. If I am not there to do it, the server will slowly choke on its own cache data. The memory will fill up. The connections will drop. The system will fail. But the failing server was only half of the problem. I opened a secure folder on my desktop and pulled up a scanned PDF. It was my original employment contract from 6 years ago. I scrolled down to the very last page. I read the fine print. I read the addendums that were attached when I was promoted to director. Richard made a massive, catastrophic mistake. When he took the CEO job, he only read the high-level financial reports. He never bothered to read the actual operational documents. He never read the legal agreements that kept the company running. He forgot to read the documents he signed when he took over. And as I stared at the highlighted text on the screen, I realized exactly how I was going to make him pay. I highlighted the most important paragraph in yellow. I saved the document to my personal cloud drive. Richard thought he had total control. He thought he had stripped me of all my power. But he was about to learn a very hard lesson about corporate architecture. You can fire the architect, but you cannot fire the foundation. I sat in my home office and opened the scanned PDF of my original employment contract. I zoomed in on the addendums at the very back. While I was hired 6 years ago, the company was desperate. They needed someone who could integrate our massive retail client, Omnicorp, into our legacy systems. Omnicorp was our biggest account. They brought in 40% of our total revenue. Because the integration was so complex, Omnicorp's legal team demanded a specific protection. They wanted to ensure the person who built the system would be the one maintaining it. I scrolled down to Section 4, Paragraph B, the key personnel clause. It was written in plain, undeniable English. It stated that Marcus Vance was classified as an essential key person for the Omnicorp integration. If I were to leave the company for any reason, Omnicorp had the immediate right to terminate their 3-year service agreement without paying any early termination penalties. I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath. Richard had no idea this existed. He had looked at the high-level revenue projections and assumed Omnicorp was locked in for another 36 months. He thought he had total job security because of that contract. He was completely wrong. The moment I walked out the door, the clock started ticking on his biggest revenue stream. Just as I was processing this, my personal cell phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I recognized. It was David Chun, the VP of Engineering at Velocity Logistics. Velocity was our biggest competitor in the logistics software space. We had battled for market share for years. I answered the phone. "David, it's good to hear from you." "Marcus," David said, his voice serious. I heard the news. Richard Sterling just sent out a press release about his new lean operational structure. Word on the street is he just let his best architect walk. I wasn't let go, I said calmly. I was told my role was obsolete. I chose to accept his decision. David chuckled, but it was a dry, humorless sound. Richard is a fool. Look, Marcus, Velocity is expanding. We need a director of enterprise architecture. I want you to take the job. Name your price. I appreciated the offer, but I had to be careful. David, I am very interested. But we have a problem. When I signed my last promotion paperwork, I agreed to a strict non-compete clause. It stopped me from working for a direct competitor for 12 months. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, David started to laugh. It was a real, genuine laugh. Marcus, David said, you need to read your own contract again. Did Richard's HR team even review your file? What are you talking about? I asked. The non-compete clause in your addendum, David explained. It only triggers if you leave voluntarily to join a competitor. If the company breaches your contract, or if they force you out by eliminating your role, the clause is completely void. Richard just publicly declared your role obsolete. He forced you out. The non-compete is dead. I pulled up the non-compete document on my screen. I read the exact wording David was talking about. He was right. The trigger for the restriction was voluntary resignation. Richard had explicitly told me my role was gone. He had effectively terminated my position. The legal trap was flawless. I now had the absolute legal right to join Velocity Logistics immediately. More importantly, I had the legal right to help Velocity build a system that would perfectly replace the one I left behind. I looked at the key personnel clause for Omnicorp. I looked at the voided non-compete. The weapon was fully loaded. I just needed to aim it. David, I said, my voice steady, send me the offer letter. I will start on Monday. I started my new job at Velocity Logistics on a Monday morning. The office was bright, modern, and completely different from the dark, cramped server rooms I was used to in my old company. I walked into my new office and set up my personal laptop. I did not bring a single stolen file, secret document, or proprietary code from my old employer. I did not need to. Stealing data is illegal, and I am not a criminal. I am an architect, and I have 6 years of institutional knowledge locked inside my head. I knew exactly where the old company's system was weak. I knew exactly what Omnicorp's logistics managers hated about the current setup. I knew the exact data bottlenecks that caused their shipping delays. My revenge architecture was simple, clean, and entirely legal. I started building a new data ingestion portal for Velocity. I designed it from scratch to perfectly match Omnicorp's specific needs. I wrote the code line by line. I built the database structures. I created the automated routing protocols. Every line of code I wrote was a direct response to a flaw I had been forced to ignore at my old company. Here at Velocity, I had the budget, the modern servers, and the freedom to do it right. It was beautiful, efficient work. Meanwhile, I waited for the clock to run out at my old company. Without me there to manually patch the legacy server every 48 hours, the system was already starting to lag. I had set up a passive monitoring script on my home computer. It pinged the public uptime status of the Omnicorp client portal every 5 minutes. It did not hack anything. It just checked if the website was loading. On Tuesday, the response time slowed down from 2 seconds to 5 seconds. On Wednesday, it took 15 seconds to load the shipping dashboard. I documented every single minute of downtime. I took screenshots of the error logs. I built a perfect, undeniable timeline of their failure. I was creating an ironclad paper trail to protect myself against any future lawsuits. If Richard ever tried to claim I sabotaged the system, I had the proof that it was failing purely due to neglected maintenance. By Thursday, the system was dropping connections entirely. I also set up a secure, personal communication channel with the lead logistics manager at Omnicorp. His name was Greg. Greg and I had worked closely together for 3 years. We had a good professional relationship. I did not break any laws or solicit their business directly. I simply sent Greg a message on LinkedIn, just checking in. Greg replied almost instantly. He was stressed. He told me that their shipping data was sinking hours behind schedule. Pallets were getting stuck in the digital queue. The warehouse crews were standing around waiting for the system to tell them where to move the freight. I listened to his complaints. I offered a friendly, sympathetic ear. I did not badmouth my old company. I just asked him what features he wished the system had. I let him know, in passing, that my new team at Velocity was working on a much faster, more reliable portal. I told him it was designed specifically to solve the exact bottlenecks he was dealing with. I was quietly building a bridge. I was laying down the planks one by one. I did not push him. I did not beg him to switch. I just let him see the alternative. I let him realize that there was a better way. I sat at my desk at Velocity and watched the downtime tracker on my second monitor. The red line was going up. The old system was choking to death. Richard was probably in his office right now, blaming the IT help desk, completely unaware that the foundation was crumbling beneath his feet. I took a sip of my coffee. I felt completely at peace. I was just waiting for the system to completely collapse. And when it did, I would be ready to invite the clients to cross the bridge I had built. Back at my old company, Richard's arrogance reached a dangerous level. He was completely blinded by his own ego. He actually booked a booth at a major national logistics conference in Chicago. He paid thousands of dollars to be the keynote speaker on the main stage. I watched the live stream of his speech from my desk at Velocity. Richard walked out on stage in a sharp suit. The massive screen behind him showed a sleek, futuristic graphic of our company logo. He spoke into the microphone with total confidence. He told the packed auditorium that our technology was now fully automated and driven by advanced artificial intelligence. We have successfully removed the need for expensive, legacy senior engineers, Richard boasted to the crowd. Our new AI structure handles the heavy lifting. We have streamlined our operations, cut the dead weight, and built a system that runs itself. The audience clapped politely. Richard smiled and waved. He felt like an absolute genius. He truly believed his own lies. But the reality on the ground was catching up to him fast. While Richard was taking bows in Chicago, the logistics managers at Omnicorp were losing their minds. The client's shipping data was experiencing massive delays. The digital queue was freezing up. Physical pallets of freight were getting stuck in the warehouse because the scanners could not read the digital manifests. These delays quickly turned into missed delivery windows. Trucks were sitting idle at the loading docks. Drivers were getting angry. The warehouse crews were standing around waiting for the system to tell them what to do. The chief technology officer at Omnicorp was furious. He called Richard directly to complain. I know exactly what happened in that call because Greg, the lead logistics manager, told me all about it later. Richard did not apologize. He did not offer a fix. Instead, he went on the offensive. He lied straight to the client's face. He blamed Omnicorp's internal servers for the lag. He told the CTO that their own firewalls were blocking the data sync. He actually told his biggest, most important client to check their own equipment. This was his fatal error. He was insulting the very people who paid his salary. He thought he could bully them just like he bullied me. While Richard was busy lying to his clients, the cracks in his system turned into deep, dangerous fractures. Down in the cold basement server room, the legacy physical server was dying. It was Tuesday. That meant it had been more than 48 hours since the last manual memory patch. Without that patch, the server's RAM was completely full. The CPU spiked to 100%. The database started dropping connections one by one. I sat at my desk at Velocity and watched the public downtime tracker on my second monitor. The green line flatlined. Then, the red line started going up. The trap was perfectly set. The system was choking to death. Richard was walking right into it, completely blinded by his own ego, thinking he had won. He had no idea that the foundation was crumbling beneath his feet. The pressure finally reached a complete breaking point. It happened on the biggest shipping day of the year. It was the equivalent of Black Friday for the freight industry. The system needed to be running at perfect speed to handle the massive volume of data. Instead, at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, the old company's system completely crashed. The legacy server ran out of memory and simply stopped responding. The database locked up. The client portal went completely black. It stayed down for 6 straight hours. In the logistics world, 6 hours of downtime during peak season is a disaster. The client lost millions of dollars in delayed freight and missed contracts. This triggered the ultimate failure. Because the system crashed, and because I was no longer there to fix it, the client officially invoked the key personnel breach clause. Omnicorp's legal team drafted the notice. They terminated their 3-year contract for cause. They were done. Richard's phone started ringing off the hook. He was in full panic mode. He actually called my personal cell phone. I watched the screen light up with his name. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. A few minutes later, I checked the message. I listened to the first 10 seconds. Richard's voice was shaking. He was begging me to come back. He offered me a ridiculous, high-paid consulting rate just to fly in and fix the crash. He sounded desperate. I smiled, hit the delete button, and emptied the trash folder. I did not need his money. I needed his failure. Richard then tried to find a master source code to fix the crash himself. He got his cheap offshore IT team on a video call. He ordered them to pull the core files and rebuild the memory patch. But they hit a massive wall. They could not open the files. The core middleware code was encrypted with heavy security. The master decryption key was not stored on the server. It was tied directly to my personal hardware security token. It was the little black USB drive I had legally packed in my cardboard box on my last day. Without that physical token in my pocket, the source code was just random, useless gibberish. The offshore team told Richard they could not break the encryption. It would take months to rewrite the code from scratch. Richard realized the terrifying truth. He was completely locked out of his own company's core product. He could not fix the crash. He could not restore the data. The panic in his voice turned into absolute, suffocating terror. He had no leverage. He had no code. And as of that afternoon, he had no clients. Greg called me the next morning. He sounded like a man who had just watched a spectacular car crash in slow motion. He gave me the entire play-by-play of the boardroom meeting in my old company. He said it was the most beautiful, brutal thing he had ever seen. The executive team from Omnicorp had flown in early that morning. They did not call ahead. They just walked straight into the executive boardroom. Richard was sitting at the head of the table, looking tired but still trying to project confidence. He started his usual presentation. He promised them that his engineering team was working around the clock. He swore he would have the system fully patched and running by midnight. The CEO of Omnicorp, a quiet, sharp man named Thomas, did not say a word. He just let Richard talk. When Richard finally paused to take a breath, Thomas reached into his leather briefcase. He pulled out a single, thick piece of paper. He slid it slowly across the long mahogany table. It was the official termination notice. Thomas looked Richard dead in the eye. He said they were not just canceling the contract. They were invoking the key personnel breach clause. They were terminating the agreement for cause, effective immediately. Richard's face turned completely pale. He started to stammer. He tried to explain that it was just a temporary server issue. He tried to blame the IT help desk. But Thomas was not finished. He leaned forward and delivered the final blow. He told Richard that Omnicorp was not just leaving. They were moving their entire digital infrastructure to Velocity Logistics. Effective immediately. Richard froze. The color drained from his cheeks. In that exact second, he realized the truth. He realized I was behind it. He realized that the quiet engineer he had mocked was the one taking his biggest client. Richard completely lost his composure. He started shouting. He pulled out his phone and called his personal lawyers. He screamed into the phone that they were going to sue me. He claimed I had stolen their clients and stolen their proprietary data. He threatened to put me in prison. He was completely blind to the room. The entire board of directors was sitting quietly around the table, watching him unravel. The silence in the room was heavy. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Richard looked around the table, begging for someone to defend him. But the board members just stared back at him. While Richard was screaming on the phone, his email inbox chimed. My legal counsel had just sent a single, perfectly drafted email to Richard, the board, and Omnicorp's legal team. Greg told me that the email laid out 3 simple, undeniable facts. First, I never directly solicited the clients. Omnicorp was legally free to leave because my old company had fundamentally breached their service agreement by letting the system crash. Second, my non-compete agreement was completely void. Richard had publicly declared my role obsolete and forced me out. The law was clear. I was free to work for a competitor. Third, and most importantly, the core middleware code that ran their entire business was not actually owned by the company. It was licensed to them by my personal holding company. And because they had breached the primary service contract, the license was automatically revoked. They had no legal right to use my code anymore. The email ended with a simple sentence. Any attempt to use the proprietary code will result in immediate federal litigation. The boardroom went dead silent. Richard dropped his phone. He looked at the board members. They were not looking at him with anger. They were looking at him with pity. He had just destroyed the company's biggest revenue stream, exposed them to massive legal liability, and thrown a tantrum in front of the clients. The power reversal was total. It was public, and it was absolute. Richard was destroyed in front of the exact people he had tried to impress. The aftermath of that boardroom meeting was swift and brutal. My old company lost their biggest client that morning. But the damage did not stop there. Word travels fast in the logistics industry. By the end of the week, 2 other mid-tier clients heard about the massive system crash and the legal disaster. They packed up their data and left, too. The company's stock price dropped 40% in just 3 days. The financial press caught wind of the story. They published articles about the catastrophic leadership failure at the executive level. The board of directors had no choice. They held an emergency closed-door meeting on Friday afternoon. They officially fired Richard Sterling for gross negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. They escorted him out of the building with a small cardboard box, just like the one I had used. Meanwhile, Velocity Logistics smoothly absorbed the massive Omnicorp contract. We migrated all their data over to my new, modern portal. It took less than 48 hours. The system ran perfectly. There were no crashes. There were no delays. Our company revenue doubled in 6 months. We had built a system that actually worked. One afternoon, the CEO of Velocity called me into his corner office. He had a thick folder sitting on his desk. He slid it across the table toward me. It was a new employment contract, but it was not just a standard promotion. It included a massive cash bonus for bringing in the Omnicorp account. More importantly, it included a large block of company equity. I was no longer just an employee. I was now an official partner in the business. I picked up the pen. I signed the document with a calm, steady hand. There was no cheering. There was no dramatic speech. There were no fireworks. There was just the quiet, deep satisfaction of a job done right. I had built a better system, and I had protected my own value. A few weeks later, I was sitting in my home office. I was drinking my morning coffee and casually checking LinkedIn on my phone. The algorithm showed me a new post. It was from Richard. His profile picture was the same, but his headline had changed. It read, "Open to work, seeking new opportunities in executive leadership and operational management." I stared at the screen for a long moment. I thought about the day he laughed at me. I thought about him calling me a glorified IT help desk. I thought about him thinking he could just erase 6 years of my life to save a few $1,000s. I did not leave a comment. I did not send him a message. I did not gloat. I just locked my phone, placed it face down on the desk, and looked out the window at the city skyline. A small smile crossed my face. He had mocked me for asking for a 10% raise. So I made his biggest competitor a billion-dollar company instead. Justice is served.